Okay, so we have a new episode of Legends and Leaders, and it's great to have Cory here. Cory, you're the co-founder and co-CEO of AltaML. You're building entirely new presence in the AI space to help people. I really help businesses fully utilize and gain the best insights from data and create solutions based on what they have in their systems to fully optimize and best. And I think it's something that can be applied to tons of businesses today. And it's really a practical version of applying AI. I mean, we see a lot of AI out there, but this is something that can be, helping lots of businesses with in practicality and optimizing their costs and, create further savings. And you have, experience creating Investopedia and being an investor as well. And so you've helped really democratize an understanding to financial terms and financial literacy, which has helped a ton of people, throughout the world through what you've done with on the internet. So I'm excited to have you here and to get into your story.
Yeah, looking forward to the conversation.
Awesome. So where did your passion, Cory, for entrepreneurship, technology, where did that kind of come from? Like, when did you first think, hey, I'm going to create a business, a tech business, and be in this space?
Well, my parents were entrepreneurs, so I think a lot of it came from around the supper room table, like just, when you're young. But we really, when I first started Investopedia, I was in college up in here. I'm Canadian. And this was like the peak of the .com bubble. So many of your listeners might not have even been around through that. Like, it was as crazy as kind of the current hype cycle we're in, perhaps even more so. And, we just wanted to start something .com, right? Like, it was, that was kind of like, we're sort of naive and young and had no idea what we were doing. And I don't know, I guess there was never really any doubt that we were going to build something. It was more just like, what are you going to build and stick .com on the end of it?
So how did you specifically come up with the idea for this idea of an investment financial literacy focused site?
Investopedia was a complete accident. You'll notice this theme as we go through everything. Like, I've never been able to actually come up with an idea that you sit down and have a business plan and build around. We actually had. So the honest truth is we were sitting, after studying, we were just sitting there kind of having a beer after when we couldn't study anymore, and sort of sketched out the biggest, baddest investment website. Started with a friend of mine named Cory Wagner. And so we just sketched out, it wasn't on a bar napkin because we were studying, we had paper, right? But we kind of brainstormed what we thought was the coolest website. And in a more sober light, when we're yeah, we're going to do this, we realized we didn't have the resources or the skills to do all the fun stuff. But we could start on the education section. We could start doing these and so those who haven't been to Investopedia, is just a financial education website, but the dictionary is a huge portion of the site. And so we knew that if we created that content once, it would still be there in a few months, a few quarters, a few years, right? And we didn't fully know the power of that, of how that related to the economies of scale or the margins on the site. But we sort of did a bunch of work on it, and then we went off and we had 4 or 5 other ideas. So we launched a bunch of different websites and didn't think that Investopedia was going to be the one. But then and this is sort of dating myself. Back then you had cool sites of the day. People don't realize it now. Everything now begins then with Google or Google or social or wherever, right? But back then Yahoo was where it was. You would go to Yahoo through the directory and find sites, and CNBC would have this cool site of the day. So one day we were featured on this cool site of the day, and traffic spiked up, right? And you're oh, right. And we kind of came back 6-9 months later. I'm okay, maybe there's something here in it. The other projects we had were all failures, but then Investopedia kept on going off. And so then we were after about a year and a half, we're in the summer, we're well, maybe we should actually try to build something out.
So how did you come up with the content for it? You just did research and try to come
for the first while, we just put in hours. We would show up at the office and we would just write terms for 4 or 5 hours, and then make sales calls for 2 or 3 hours, and then write more. So over time we had a once we actually had revenue coming in, we had a network of hundreds of writers across the US that would actually be CFAs, portfolio managers, CPAs, real professionals writing on. But early on, it was just us. We were just researching. We were business students.
Did you ever feel like Wikipedia was competing with you?
Wikipedia didn't exist at the time, my friend.
So really, it came out much later.
Came around after. There was all this like, it was like, I mean, someone can fact check me on it. If it wasn't in the same, I don't know when Wikipedia first came out, but like it wasn't even competition early on. And then over time, like there was still an issue. Most advertisers don't like user generated content, or at least back then. I mean, again, this is before social was where, like in the early 2000s, it was a different internet. So Wikipedia was not a competitor back then, which is crazy to think, right? Like,
yeah.
Google, like we asked an interview question in the early 2000s, like what search engine do you use? Because like the cutting edge, like, kids were using this site, we were using Google. Others like, because remember you had like, mentioned Yahoo, but Excite, Lycos, Webcrawler, AltaVista. Like again, there's all these, like people forget there was like a dozen big search engines back then, right? So when you're trying to figure it out, I mean, over time it became that all roads led to Google from an SEO perspective. But yeah, whatever. I guess everybody calls it like Web 1.0 now or whatever, right? But it was like the internet was different back then. It's only 20 something years ago.
Yeah. What did it take, Cory, to start to get readers? Like, was it just a lot of word of mouth? Was it just, I mean, you got that traction initially from CNBC, but what were you trying to do to acquire readers?
Like, it won't help your listeners now because it was like old school SEO. Like it was like link building. It was just, doing content syndication, writing for other sites, like just blocking and tackling, like just gritty, boring stuff. Like just, and like over time, I mean, that's the thing, like, because Investopedia was around from that early stage on. And like, if you look at, for anybody who's like in the SEO game now, like when you look at the link profile, like it's almost indestructible having a domain like that now because it goes back so long and there's so much there, right? Like back then, .edu domains were like really powerful. So like if you had a link, which sounds crazy today, right? But if you had a link from a university, you were more authoritative. I mean, this was how Google was created, right? Of their whole thing, it was like actually that algorithm was really based, just I'm simplifying, but around the number of links and the quality of those links coming in. So, at .edu was supposed to be like the best. And so like we built relationships with profs and, hey, you want to add my link here? Like it was super old school. You couldn't do it again. It doesn't help you today. Like, I don't think you would use that technique nowadays to actually build up authority.
Mm-hmm. So before like the acquisition happened, Cory, like were you feeling like, hey, I'm ready to go and kind of move on to something else? Like what were you kind of thinking at that time?
No, not at all. Like the biggest problem is like you can only sell Charles Schwab or like E-Trade, who are our customers. Like it was the big kind of discount brokerages back then. You could only sell them so many ads in a month before you actually had to put on a tie at some point to actually go meet someone in person. And like so we were just a bunch of university kids in Canada, right? And so remember, there's no video back then. Like it wasn't like we were doing video calls. We were just cold calling people and like selling via email. So at some point you actually have to go to New York and make a sales pitch. We're like, shit, like we're gonna have to build a sales team and do all the rest of that. Like there was no programmatic. There was no this. Like it was all direct sales to agencies. It was like the same stuff from traditional, just you were selling digital ads. And so the fact that we'd have to kind of like rebuild it, and we had no idea what it would take to actually build out a sales team like that. And we just kept on getting calls from, like, you live in the problem that digital media is, like you live in fear of Google, right? And so like every kind of month you're just worried that what you built could be taken away. And so at one point one of the advisors that had called us over the years, we kind of built a relationship with him and then hired this banker and kind of went on the process formally. But it was really just based on that of like having to actually meet people in real life, to be honest.
Huh. Were people in these meetings, they were kind of like pitching you like, hey, because you were trying to sell ads, but they were like, what if we acquired you? Like that was starting to come up?
No, never like that. Like what I mean is like every investment banker will have associates that are dialing for dollars, trying to actually build in their CRM, like the company sites that want to sell. I was more saying like us on, so we knew a bunch of the investment bankers that could represent us that had done deals in the space. But more us going out was like we were just we would randomly cold call and try to figure out who the agencies were for all the big ad buyers, right? So you'd go on Yahoo Finance and you'd see there'd be a new ad for this brokerage. And so you'd be like, okay, like let's try to get a hold of whoever there's making those ad buys. And it was still pretty old school back then. It was like wining and dining in New York was a lot of it, to be honest.
Mm-hmm. Why did you think that Forbes was like the ideal partner at the time? Was the offer just right? And how do you think the handling was of it after it was bought?
I mean, we didn't until we went through the process. We actually ran a formal process and, reached out to whatever, 20, 30, 40 organizations. I think we had 12 in-person visits of like, companies coming up to Edmonton, Canada. And then eventually, Forbes was one of 3 at the end that we were negotiating with. And in the end, it was the best deal. But yeah, we would not necessarily have said at the beginning of the process that they were the ones. It was just, and I think there's one experience or a lesson that I would share. Like selling a business is like, it's the same as selling a house. You want to create a market, you want to create a competitive process. And so the best thing we did was we had a banker in the Valley who was like really, really good at negotiation and created sort of that funnel where we had multiple parties bidding against each other. And so from that, we got to the best deal, but we would have never have got there unless we actually created that process and ran that process in that manner.
Huh. That's interesting. So, were you kind of like, what was it like for you after it was sold? Because you put so much time into this. Like, how did you kind of find the next thing and find like new purpose in something else?
It was horrible. I was so unhappy. Like, not like right afterwards, but like after leaving, it was like, probably was like the most unhappy I've ever been in my life.
Huh.
So like, and as I sort of like process it and think through, it was, like we'd set all these goals on like, okay, we wanted to pay off our mortgage. We paid off our mortgage. We wanted to be worth like, $1 million. We wanted to, then we were there at whatever. And then, we had the other financial goals. I want to be worth X, and which I think are the wrong goals to like quantify your worth, by self-worth. But like you kind of reach this point, you're like, okay, I'm done. Like, what would I do next? And you're clearly not done, but I hadn't yet set what my next thing was. And so you said it's like, for myself, I learned that if I didn't have purpose, if I didn't have something that I was aiming for and building, then I'd be unhappy. But it took me a few years to actually figure that out. And, I think there's a lot of resources right now. I mean, including like podcasts like this, where you can like hear lessons from that. But I don't like, the world has changed a lot in the last just 10, 15 years, right? Like, back then it was like I've been heavily involved with groups like Entrepreneurs Organization and YPO. And so even within like where you're hanging around other entrepreneurs, not everybody is sold necessarily. So being able to actually have that peer group or being able to kind of have that group that you can lean on, which is kind of why I don't mind telling the story. Hopefully there's that, like, as I talk to other entrepreneurs that are selling, it's like, you're just trading. Like, it's not like your problems go away. You had one asset that you really understood extremely well, and you were good at growing. Now you've got, maybe more assets, but just because you're a good entrepreneur doesn't make you a good investor. And so I can tell you, small incremental gains kind of coming up over a business, your net worth can be here, but if it goes down, 5% or 10%, all of a sudden you're completely stressed out, you're completely unhappy, and, it's a different sort of problems. And so like that side of it was really stressful. But so between figuring out how to be an investor and not knowing what I wanted to do the next stage of my life was, I mean, to me that manifested in, I don't know if I want to say depression. I mean, still sold a company, you're happy with that, but like still definitely not, I'd say unhappy for sure.
So then why did you decide that you wanted to be in the AI space, and like how did you come up with the idea that you're building now?
Well, again, it was a total accident. So we cookie cuttered. So we built a platform to kind of launch PDF sites. And then people are like, why the frick would you do that? Just use WordPress. Yeah, now you would, but like back at that time, it's not like, so we actually built like a CMS, right? So we put in a significant amount of capital, built the CMS, and then like launched like 10 to 12 pedia sites. Like think like Safepedia or Corrosionpedia, like super boring industries that like hadn't yet come online. And so when we were doing that, we were hiring all these contractors on Upwork. So we had like hundreds of contractors researching, writing first drafts, doing all this. We were spending a ton of money on only freelancers instead of like having local, like with Investopedia, we had hired analysts and like they worked side by side. Here we built it totally kind of distributed. And so around 2015, I approached some profs at the local university, at the University of Alberta here, a guy by the name of Dr. Randy Goebel, and launched a program around algorithmic content generation. So keep in mind, this is 2015. So Gen AI, generative AI, wasn't a term at all. Like the paper and the fundamental underpinnings to like what enables Gen AI or these large, without getting too technical here, these large language models, the stuff that powers, you know, things like Chat GPT, like we were still years away from that. So was years ahead of the technology, where the technology was then was probably like, I think OpenAI has proved that we probably underestimated the size of the project by, let's say, $500 million, right? You know, so the project did not work out, but through that process was exposed to like what I didn't even realize is my local university. I mean, my alma mater is actually like a top 10, top 20 school worldwide in the academic side of AI. So there's this one guy, his name is Dr. Richard Sutton, literally wrote the book on this branch of AI called reinforcement learning. So that meant like you've got this weird situation where we have, let's call it an emerging tech ecosystem in my province. But like, you know, one of the top AI schools, so the most sought after job title on the planet, and data scientist or ML engineer, everyone was coming here, getting their PhD, and then going off to the valley. So initially, we're just like, well, instead of hiring 2 or 3, let's hire 4 or 5. So we just started hiring ML engineers, and then it eventually has kind of resulted in, you know, we're a venture studio, so we're an investor in early stage vertical AI businesses. But again, like with Investopedia, we sort of were in the, you know, and I think the lesson there that I take is like, I mean, I feel like sometimes I hear, you know, younger entrepreneurs want to have the perfect idea and, you know, they've got it all written on paper, but I don't know, I just think that's bullshit. Like I've never been able to actually come up with it. And I think if you look at the history of great organizations, most often it's not like totally thought out. It's about an entrepreneur getting in the game, getting data, and like continuing to, and I hate the term pivot because I'm not saying like you're getting in and you're trying to like, but like Twitter was, you know, the origin story of that was it was just a messaging application or something like this that was for a project management software. Like Facebook was basically a hot or not app, right? Like, you know, Pixar was just, it was a hardware company. I mean, even Steve Jobs, like you look at the story of that, like burned tons of money on that. And then eventually like, you know, they found like, you know, kind of over time got some, anyway, so there's example after example of that. And so I just kind of think of it as like, if you get in the game, if you're in the right space and you're somehow kind of being able to learn, it's really interesting what opportunities, like what doors are open.
Yeah, I think it's a definitely good way to look at it. You got to just try. So now you're doing, Cory, like you mentioned, you're doing AI investments and you have this like studio. What are you really trying to look for in the space? Like what are you most trying to identify to invest in? Like what are some needs you think the market has that haven't been addressed yet?
So, and yeah, so over time, then we actually formally incorporated. So I built this with my partner Nicole, and so we run the business together. And so we have like our model right now is like a venture studio. So think of us as an early stage investor, but we describe ourselves as an institutional co-founder. So we'll often be like that technical partner in building an applied AI business. So applied again, not sort of deep research, and then vertical and usually focused on that kind of B2B. But what makes us really unique is we've got this other side of the business where we build AI labs with large corporates and governments. And the reason we have that is because as we got into it, I was trying to build AI products, or we were trying to build AI products, and it was like all the data exists from the big organizations. And so, you know, we tried building all, you know, this model where we could, you know, co-develop together with them. So, you know, being able to get access to kind of the unique data and the understanding of those industry workflows. And so the two sides of the business really work well together. It's like Buffett says, I'm a better investor because I'm an operator, and I'm a better operator because I'm an investor. And so we have this other side of the business because number one, it pays for all of our overhead that we have in terms of this initial company creation. Like you got to be doing something to actually get a founder share in a business. You got to, and then after seeing hundreds of different AI use cases, we think that we also have a unique edge in terms of what will work and what won't. And so we can either, sometimes we're adding that value to, say, a Fortune 1000 organization or to another founder. So very different businesses. There's some trickiness in terms of how that works, but we think that in essence, we've built this platform that allows us to take bets in AI. So I feel like I've seen this movie before. Like everything that's going on in AI will be bigger than the internet was, going back to the late 90s. And right now we're at like a peak hype, and it's all there's lots of bullshit, and every pitch deck out there has AI in it and blah, 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 right? There's going to be a crash, right? We're going to see a crash. But my thesis is that over the next decade, we're going to see the real companies being created. And I believe that the biggest opportunity is in building these vertical industry specific applications. So being able to like have a deep understanding of the workflows and then build an edge on data. Even when you're using large language models and a bunch of these new technology that comes out, you still, I think, need those two pieces in any successful ML application. So as machine learning or AI eat software and together, like, we've now got a platform that we hope is pretty close to indestructible, because we'll have like positive cash flow that comes from, this kind of the services business. But then as we go through and we see this, we can make a whole bunch of bets. So success is that over the next, we're going to spin off 20 to 30 companies in the next 5 to 6 years, or more. But like, let's call it like 4 to 6 companies a year. And you know what? I think that we're going to have some massive wins in clean tech. And then I think longer term, we're going to have even bigger wins in health. And so, if you view AI as I do, as like something that will fundamentally change every industry, but especially the biggest problems that humanity has, I think it's a pretty cool area to be.
Sounds like it. Yeah. So you have this like where you have the system that you have now, but you guys also function like this technical partner. I think you recently commented on an article about how the importance of chief AI officers in different companies and like why they're very much needed. Like, how do you think that role is going to evolve, and like how do you guys how can you guys also be helpful with, because maybe some of these companies, like you have a CMO that's almost you contract another company out to be your CMO. Like, do you think that you guys like will play that role for other people?
I think we can help sort of be part of that education process. But what I really liked, and that was an advisor of ours who posted that piece, Mark Minovich, who's a real AI thought leader. I think that the biggest barrier right now to AIML projects is mindset. It's actually not the technology. It's how executives face those problems. And so as you have these, it kind of even goes beyond chief data officers. As you have a chief AI officer, those that can actually, like, we shouldn't be doing AI just for the sake of AI. You should be driving your strategy with data, right? And so it just so happens that you've got these cool new tools that help you do that. And so if you can help build the literacy about what's possible, and how really every process can not just be improved, but reimagined using this tech. I mean, it opens up the door for a lot of interesting software to be created. But that mindset, and like, it's not like a lot of the stuff you can just get it off the shelf today. Like, we're still in what if you compare it to the internet, I still think we're like where the internet was in 96 or 97, like the dark ages. Like, we haven't even seen, never mind like Uber coming out, like, YouTube hasn't even come out, right? We're barely at the point where we actually know what browsers we're going to use or that Google's established, right? And you could argue, though, that there's some differences that like the hyperscalers, the Googles and the Amazons and the Microsofts are definitely, they're not asleep at the switch. So that is true. But I still think the analogy holds that like we're in the early days, and so that organizations that have the right mindset and put these roles into place will have the most success.
Yeah, I agree. So Cory, today right now, like we're seeing a lot of different like potential applications for AI. Like, for example, there was a recent model released that could replace, many stock images or videos that OpenAI just put out, Sora. And so Where do you think this kind of practical AI is going to come into place? Like, like you mentioned, like we're not even at the YouTube yet. Like, what are some of these early, more practical, globally scalable AI? Where do you think that those areas will be in?
Well, I'll actually say that where I'm focused is not the global scalable AI. When it comes to these foundational model companies, there will continue to be this arms race, and you'll see, whether it's OpenAI or Cohere, Anthropic, I don't know. I mean, there's so much money going on to it. It's tough to say. I put that in the too hard pile. I can't win in that area. What I do know is that there's going to be hundreds, thousands of companies created that solve mission critical problems that actually improve, processes in specific industries. And so we're always looking to partner with those that have that industry knowledge, or where we can build some edge on data, so that it's really difficult for new entrants to be able to compete with us. So it's actually the exact opposite. Like, all the hype right now, and rightly so, is around these LLMs. And we still use LLMs in a ton of the solutions we're building. But it's as part of an overall solution where, again, it's going deep into understanding those workflows within an industry, right? And you don't get extra points for using the most complex technology, right? Sometimes you can use like shallow classical models, right? Sometimes there's other deep learning techniques, right? It doesn't really matter how you solve it. In fact, the less you talk about AI, the better. So I think the dirty little secret with the AI industry is that there won't be an AI industry in 10 years. It's just going to be where software goes. Like, all software will be driven by data and AI. Huh. And so it's really a matter of like pursuing the opportunity there and getting to know industries. Like I said, we pay the bills with finance now, but clean tech and then health are, I think, the most exciting spaces. And so if we can develop that industry expertise and go hard there, then I think we can create billions of dollars worth of value and make the world a better place at the same time.
Right. Sounds good. So just the last question that I have, like, what do you aspire to achieve, in the AI space over the next 5 to 10 years? Like you mentioned, the different areas like this that you want to be able to target. Like, but what does this kind of look like? You launch certain companies. What are some of the short term and long term goals that you have over this time period?
I mean, we've really built short term. We've really built a great model around our studio. Short term, we're raising a fund. And I think be able to actually take on and launch our next sort of 5 to 10 ideas. That's really the focus on the short term. In the long run, success to me is solving is curing a type of cancer, is being involved in making a dent in mental health or something like diabetes, like the merging of biology and data. And yes, there's a whole field of AI-based drug discovery, and that could be part of it. But we just see I see such amazing opportunity in terms of like how data and machine learning are going to impact various areas in health. Success to me would be like that we can look back and go like, man, when we partnered with those researchers, we were a significant part of like curing this disease. That would be truly amazing.
Yeah. Well, look, Cory, I appreciate you coming on and sharing your story. I think there's a lot that people can learn from the way that you approach problems and, kind of how you figure things out. Even you don't necessarily go in, with one direction in mind, and kind of something else can occur, and you're willing to change and, so to speak, pivot, for lack of a better word. And I think now what you're trying to do in AI and solve specific problems and really focus on individual, unique use cases is a great way to really help businesses out. And I'm excited to see these new projects that you bring to life, and for the fund to be complete and to start activating. So thanks for coming on, Cory.
Thanks for having me. And I guess I'll say I'm easy to find on LinkedIn. I always make time in my schedule every month for entrepreneurs. If there's a way that I can help or connect or do anything, I mean, I'm not necessarily gonna invest or buy right off the bat, but if I can share an experience that helps someone starting out, like I said, I always make time for it. Usually when I got windshield time traveling somewhere or another, but feel free to ping me on LinkedIn, and if I can help, I'm happy to jump in.
Awesome.